In this video, we'll be discussing scoped weapons in Counter-Strike. Exciting, I know. I've left specific links in the description and comments to different parts of the video if you're only interested in a specific topic. Before we get started though, let me state the obvious. The AUG and SG are overpowered. The AUG, the AUG, or the
Armee Universalgewehr,
that's Universal Army Rifle for us uncultured swine, was officially added to CSGO via patch on October 9th, 2018. This was the same update that reduced the impact of pistol rounds, neutered the CZ, and also lowered the SG553's price, with both the AUG and SG now being only $50 more than the most used TNCT rifles, the M4 and AK-47. Valve must have figured this would finally convince people to learn these two previously unloved weapons. Most initial opinions when the update first came out was that the SG, fondly known by 1.6 fans as the Krieg, was going to be the star of the show. They were dead wrong. A big reason that people thought the SG would see more success than the AUG was that some pro players had already done lots of experimentation with the SG in the past, while nobody was really using the AUG. As you probably know, the T and CT sides are quite different, and the T side often has a lot of money as long as they string 1 or 2 rounds together due to getting money from bomb plants and having cheaper guns and cheaper incendiaries. While the CT side is often on a knife's edge, and as long as the terrorist side is doing damage to them, their money is very low, so they didn't really have the money to experiment with the AUG. However, with the price reduction, none of this matters anymore, and players were free to experiment with both weapons. 3 months later, and the AUG is the ominous villain going into CSGO's first major of the year, starting February 13th.
Hallo, wie geht's denn so?
Let's explore why this is the case and why you should be using the gun yourself unless you have some weird pride for handicapping yourself in a competition or competitive setting. Stats-wise, the AUG and M4 aren't worlds apart. All you have to really know is that they have the same fire rate, but the AUG has a tighter spread, better armor penetration, and can one-shot headshot at super close range. The creme de la fraise, though, is the scope on top, that noobs like me are all over like a weeb on a new stuffed anime pillow. This scope enables you to hold even the most degenerate of angles and is a boon to the CT side, giving it a much needed buff. The only advantages the M4 has going for it is that it has a faster reload and has a $50 less price tag, which is meaningless in CSGO's dystopian future of high inflation. While the AUG's price reduction might have looked harmless at first, it turns out if something costs basically the same and is 5% better, everyone is going to use it. Every percent matters in competition, and I'm surprised Valve didn't realize this. Or maybe they did and they just overestimated how stubborn the CSGO player base is at learning new things. In CSGO's economy, you generally expect to pay more for a better weapon. That's how the game's balanced. In the past, cheap and powerful weapons like the Tech 9, CZ, and UMP needed to be nerfed because they were far too inexpensive for their power level. The M4S also caught a nerf because it was much superior to the M4A4, which draws parallels to the current situation we are talking about with the AUG and the M4. A common argument I have seen goes, only the prices changed and nothing else. Nobody bothered to use the AUG before, it was just as overpowered. A $300 increase is a big buff. Surely if the price was reverted or increased a little bit more than it is right now, say $150 more, everyone would be happy and the gun would be, in theory, balanced again. As right now it is just a straight upgrade and it costs the same, so there's no reason not to use it. Even if the AUG was still being used often, players would still often have to pick between buying a crucial smoke and using the overpowered AUG if the price was reverted. Okay, so the SG is also only $50 more than the AK, and we have already established this amount of money difference is too insignificant to matter at all. So why isn't that gun being called out for being OP and being used by everybody? The AUG's counterpart on the terrorist side also has some big positives over the old guard AK-47. A higher first shot accuracy and a super high armor penetration, along with a scope, make it seem amazing at first. However, unlike the AUG versus M4, the AK still has some advantages over the SG. First off, where the AUG only has a 2% slower move speed than the M4, which is insignificant on the CT side, the SG's 4% slow is a big deal on the T side where you are taking map control or rushing onto bomb sites during an execute. The big difference though is that the SG has a weird and hard to learn spray pattern. Since people have put so much work into mastering the AK-47 and the SG isn't always the superior weapon, it appears only players who have really practiced the SG can use it to its full potential, and so it's more of a specialist weapon. Since the T side doesn't always want to be holding angles with a scope, the SG isn't always useful, unlike the CT side that pretty much wants everyone to be holding angles with scopes at the start of the round. However, I think the usage of it right now is a little bit too low, and in the future, I think from watching some Team Liquid demos, who I think are ahead of the meta, I think that there will be 1 to 2 SG players per team, maybe 3 if you have your opper who buys the SG as well, when he can't afford the op, and then have 2 people who are like your entries who use the AK. So even though the SG isn't being used that much right now, it doesn't look broken. Maybe that's just because it's hard to use, and when people get used to it, it will also be broken and overpowered. The AUG, on the other hand, is actually easier to use than the M4A1, and it offers virtually no drawbacks to the A1 except its longer reload. So yes, the AUG is overpowered, and expect to see a lot of it if you watch the upcoming CSGO Major in Poland, and you should also learn the gun because it'll make you better at CSGO. It's very unlike Valve to do a balance patch before a major, so you got around 2 months to abuse this irresistible 5.56 Austrian bullpup rifle. One of the big storylines in the pro CSGO scene last year was the Liquid versus Astralis rivalry. Astralis was a dominant force that hasn't been seen since NIP plowed through 87 straight land maps without losing in 2013. Unlike NIP though, Astralis did get upset a few times by other teams, but Liquid was not one of those teams. In fact, they weren't able to beat them in a single best-of-3 series in the entire year, despite having 12 chances to do so. Their only success was in a best-of-1 match at the FACEIT Major. With this and the fact that they just couldn't win a large tournament to save their life, Liquid finally changed their lineup in the recent offseason, swapping Brazilian player Taco for American Stewie 2K, as well as giving up their longtime coach Zeus and bringing in former player Adren in his place. With these changes, they were finally able to overcome their demons and beat Astralis 2-1 to win the recent iBuyPower Masters 2019. After watching the demos from the 2 maps Liquid beat them on, Dust 2 and Overpass, I believe that the scoped rifles certainly were a factor and helped give Liquid another edge in the match to edge out their longtime rivals. However, before going crazy, let's dial back and give a few disclaimers for this event. While iBuyPower Masters had many good teams and a good prize pool, the tournament was marred by tech issues and delays. The event was unwatchable for the group stages and even had to evacuate everyone at one point due to bad security. Some of the matches had to be played off stream and there were no recordings, and thus no one here will ever get to watch them except those people who were actually there when they happened. 2 of those unwatchable matches involved FaZe Clan being upset by Ghost Gaming and going out early from the tournament. Because FaZe is a top 5 team in the world, this should not be happening. However, the FaZe players seem more happy than sad about leaving this disaster so early. So it could be argued that Astralis had a similar mindset going into the finals and thus did not try their 100% to win. This is, however, an intangible factor and can't really be discussed further because we don't know their exact mental mindset. But yes, it could have been a big factor. However, in the final itself, Liquid were leagues apart from Astralis in scoped rifle usage and kills. Let's go deeper into this on the 2 maps Liquid won. Their AUG usage was night and day to Astralis's. Liquid appears to have 100% switched to the AUG. In fact, the only map they got M4 kills on was the one they lost 16-4. Astralis still relied heavily on the M4A4 and didn't appear yet to have a grasp on the AUG. Only really Xipix was a frequent purchaser of the gun, and their kills with it were quite low. The same situation repeated itself for the SG. AUG always bought it over the AK-47, and NAF was also a frequent purchaser of the weapon. On Dust 2, the SG seemed to be a very big asset to Liquid's terrorist side. They would often have one player lurking B tunnels with it while the other went long A doors. It seems hard to deny that Liquid's better knowledge of the current meta helped them beat Astralis for this first time ever. But can they repeat this success at higher stakes? Liquid versus Astralis certainly seems to be the most likely major final to happen at this point in time. The chances of Astralis not watching their demos and realizing that they need to adopt the AUG is the same as Liquid's M4 kills on the final map of this iBuyPower final, which if you remember, was 0. Here are some stats taken from HLTV from various pro tournaments over the last few months. First off, we have ECS, which I believe took place in November, and in this tournament the AUG was only at 2.6%, while the M4 had quite a high 21.74%. As we move into the European minor, the M4 was down to 19%, while the AUG was rising steadily at a 6.86%. At the disastrous iBuyPower Masters, the M4 and AUG were neck and neck, and it looked like the AUG was about to overtake the M4 for the first time in CSGO history. This finally happened at the Americas minor, where the AUG was almost 3% more used than the M4. At the last chance play-in for the major, the AUG well overtook the M4. However, there was only 4 teams in attendance here, so it's hard to take too much from it. The same can be said for the E-League Invitational because there were also only 4 teams here. However, the numbers for the M4 were back up to similar numbers and the AUG was back down. While the numbers look far from as apocalyptic as some CSGO professionals have put it, you have to remember it takes time to learn a new weapon and playstyle, even for the people who play this game as a living. The slow growth in AUG usage seems to prove this, and that more and more people are picking it up. The question, of course, is when will this growth stop? I feel like the only reason for somebody not to use the AUG right now is that they don't feel comfortable using it yet. So without a nerf, the M4A4 will probably be joining its brother in the trash can in due time. A common criticism about the scoped rifle meta is that it makes the game no longer Counter-Strike. It's now COD or something. Scoped rifles have been in CSGO since the very beginning, as well as being in Source and 1.62. Just because they are seeing a large amount of use now does not mean they are not part of Counter-Strike. Shotguns, SMGs, LMGs, auto snipers, and even a riot shield at once upon a time are also part of Counter-Strike. Don't get any ideas, Valve. What isn't Counter-Strike though are guns that are priced far too low for their power level, breaking the core economy system that makes Counter-Strike Counter-Strike. Unfortunately, the cheap scoped rifles are just another gun on a long list to break this principle. They aren't Counter-Strike. The same way $500 pocket AKs and rapid-fire Tech 9s, as well as a fucking R8 that can one-shot in the upper chest, are not Counter-Strike, or at least shouldn't be. CSGO was pretty damn balanced before Valve implemented their price reduction, and it seems irresponsible of them in hindsight. Since the changes already happened though, let's look on the positive side. For better or worse, we have a new rifle meta for the first time in years, and it should be interesting to see unfold. Maybe interesting in the same way as a train wreck or active volcano, but interesting regardless. Either way, I will be watching every single match of the upcoming major. How about you? Let me know down below if you somehow made it to this part in the